I'm going to start today with today's tie. If you know botany, you might recognize this as a coffee bean plant. And there's a reason why I'm wearing this tie, and it will all tie together in the end. Ha ha. Another tribute coming up in about a month and a half is Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Mesta, who are more of my mentors. And one of their best lessons, which they do tag team, and if you get a chance to see it, never miss it if you can possibly see it, where they talk about professionalism. And if you can't catch them telling it, then get their book on professionalism, which is the same content but without their a wonderful and amusing delivery.
I actually got to do both. So
Now,
the book and it was great.
and one of the lessons in their talk is about your author look. And they're not telling you what your author look has to be. They're telling you you should have an author look because it will become part of your brand. It will become how people recognize you. And it should be something you are comfortable wearing a lot because you're going to wear it anytime you're out at a public event as an author. So it becomes your brand. Kevin has his sport jackets. Rebecca has her very elegant dresses. They do talk about the comfortable side because, for instance, they have people who have got really, really elaborate uh, costumes in corsets and everything. Women who've got those, that's become their look, which is really great until they go to Dragon Con in Atlanta, where it's in the 90s, and they're wearing their author look. And it's like, okay, how do I dump ice down this thing? And there are other examples. Well, so they tell you to think about it as you're coming up with your author look. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm hearing this for the first time at the Writers of Future workshop, and I'm wearing what I would wear anyway in a setting like that, which is what I wear to work, which is a button-down shirt and black pants. All black because it's easier for me to decide which ones to wear then. But the button-down shirts, I've got some different colors on those. I was like, okay, so I can do this. I can make this my author look. It's nothing special, but I'm a programmer. This is what I wear, and never ties because programmers hate ties. Programmers despise ties. I had joked that if I had a job that I would lose the interview because wouldn't wear a tie, then I didn't want that job. And one day I was surfing social media and I saw one of the Apollo astronauts, I forget which one, might have been Borman, wearing a Saturn V tie, where the entire length of the tie was the Saturn V rocket. And I said, I want that tie. I'm the guy who hates ties. I want that tie. So I did some research. He wasn't an accident he was wearing that tie. The tie company had given it to him so he would wear it so people like me would want it. That tie company, Cyber Optics Tie Labs, I followed their page and found out where they're from. Turns out that they are a Detroit-based artisan tie company that's part of the Detroit Arts Revival, trying to bring arts back to Detroit to help the community grow, because you're probably aware Detroit's had some hard times. And they make all their own ties, often with public domain art, such as NASA art is all public domain, as long as it doesn't have the NASA logo or the face of a recognizable person. And as long as you don't use it in a way that implies NASA is endorsement, you can use NASA art. We taxpayers paid for it after all. So they use NASA art, they use Gray's Anatomy art from the 1900 something edition that's long out of copyright. They use all this other art that they can get places to keep the cost down because they're a little tiny artisan shop. They're not some place with huge licensing budget. And so I looked to their website where they have this stuff, and it's like, oh, that's cool. I guess I'd like that tie. Where can I buy it around here? I go down to Kalamazoo where they have a reseller, but they didn't have that tie. But I looked and said, but I want that tie, and I want that tie, and I want that tie. I walked out of there with 4 ties because they're cool, geeky ties. And I discovered that what I hated about ties in part was boringness, that I could make ties my author look to the point where it is extremely rare you will see me at any sort of an event without my tie. I have 49 now, and I bring them all with me on trips because I never know which day I'm going to want to wear which tie, because every tie has a story. And there's a reason why I'm wearing that tie. And so, A, it's accomplishing the branding that Kevin and Rebecca talk about. B, it's an icebreaker. People ask me about the tie, and suddenly we're in a conversation as opposed to random strangers standing and looking at each other. The fact that I have a story to go with the tie gets me talking. Most of my ties, by no means all of them, but most of them are ties that I bought to celebrate a particular story that I sold. Not reprints, because I don't make enough money for a reprint to even pay for a tie, but often they're tied to a particular story. Such as this one with the coffee beans was a tie I bought after I sold Analog, a story called It Came from the Coffee Maker, about an artificially intelligent coffee maker and how much he hates his life because other AIs get to do things like drive all the traffic control through Atlanta Airport, or run the National Weather Service and predict the nation's weather. And this coffee maker gets to boil water and grind beans. So he has a bad attitude. So that's why I bought this tie. And Dean, who I've known a lot of years now, runs into me at Writers of the Future, and Dean knows that there's a story behind every tie, so he asks about it. And I tell him that this is the story that came with this tie. And he looks at me and he says, "So that's been published somewhere?" I said, "Yep, that was in Analog." He says, "Have the rights reverted yet?" "Oh, yeah, that was more than a year ago. The rights for Analog generally revert in a year." We'll talk about that generally. The world is changing, unfortunately. And he says, "Send that to Pulp House," which is the magazine that he and Chris publish. That sounds like a Pulp House story. That's not a guarantee. When an editor says, "Send me a story," doesn't mean he'll actually want it. He has to read the bloody thing. But I sold that story as a reprint because of this tie and because Dean knew to ask. So that's why in a Dean and Chris tribute, I have to wear the coffee maker tie. Side note on that story sense, I did something that Dean and Chris and I would tell you never to do unless the money's really good. There's lots of things that will change if the money is really good. My agent came to me with a question from Amazon/Audible, because Audible is, of course, just a division of Amazon these days. They were looking for short stories in the neighborhood of 7.5 minutes. What we once might have called bathroom reads. That's probably still where they mostly get read, but people are reading them on their devices. And they wanted some short stories, and they asked for some proposals. And I proposed 5 different short stories that I could write for them. And one of them was an abridgment of It Came from the Coffee Maker, because the original was way too long. 7.5 minutes is not a long story. Out of my 5 proposals, they took 3, including the coffee maker. And we let them know this story has already been published and republished. And it's like, that's okay. We mostly want original one, but we'll take that one. We like it. But the terms on this were something extremely unusual that I want you never to sell unless the money's really good. They own those 3 stories outright at this point. I cannot resell the rights to them at all. Period. End of discussion. That is something the Dean and Chris would tell you never to sign. But I'm going to tell you that I spent a grand total of 2 hours on these 3 stories, and I'm not permitted by the contract to say what I was paid, but I will allude to the fact that every single one of them was noticeably more than my monthly mortgage for 750 words. It was at a point where I said, if I wrote 3 stories that good, I can write 3 more stories later on. You don't normally give away all the rights like that. But this was a case where the payoff versus the time was so good and made me feel good that I wrote 2 of those stories were completely original and they were under 2 hours for both of them and brought in that kind of payment. Dean and Chris might still chew on me about it, but I felt like it was the right way to go. But then that's a good introduction to get us talking about Dean and Chris. Let me optimize for video, share my screen, and have our start. Dean Wesley Smith on the left, Kristine Kathryn Rusch on the right, his wife and frequent collaborator. And today we're going to do a tribute to Dean and Chris and the lessons I've learned from them. Some of the lessons, because boy, they're full of lessons. You've been listening for a while here now, most of you. I think in the 13 sessions that came prior to this, there were 2 where I never mentioned Dean once. And one of them was my tribute to Dave. So Dean especially, and Chris, I've engaged with her less, but Chris as well, have been huge influences on my writing career and the choices I make in it. So naturally, I'm going to start by talking about Kevin McLaughlin, as opposed to Chris and Dean, but for a very specific reason. First of all, Kevin is a writer you should check out, best-selling multiple times, 100 science fiction and fantasy novels. He's a good writer. He's prolific and disciplined, which is why he wrote the book on the lower right over here, The Coffee Break Novelist. It's lessons he learned on how to get a lot of writing into a short time in a packed, busy schedule. It's lessons on finding your priorities and figuring out how to make the most of the time you have. So if you feel like you are crunched for time, take a look at what Kevin has to say. He's also lately been doing a deep dive into AI and AI used in writing, and he has a very contrarian view to a lot of people, and he defends it well. He's essentially saying AI is here, get used to it, learn it. You are not going to get stories out of AI, but you're going to get a lot else out. And before he became a full-time novelist, Kevin was heavy in the business community, in the law community. And Kevin's been watching all of the legal cases where people are trying to sue to stop AI. Every one of those cases so far has been decided in favor of the AI companies because the companies and their lawyers understand copyright and what they are doing, with the exception of cases where they may have used training material without proper approval. And may is the emphasis. With the exception of that, every one of them is within the bounds of what copyright allows. And so the idea that they are doing something they can't get away with is not being supported by the courts. Kevin writes about this so much more detail than I possibly could. You want to go read some of his writings on this to see the other side, because right now we're in an era of heavy witch hunting, and the witch hunters are starting to really tick me off, because the witch hunters are people who think they can spot AI from 100 miles away and love to jump on and dogpile somebody who's using AI, whether they are or not. And more often, there's not. But the witch hunters don't care, because everybody loves to hunt a witch. Everybody loves to do that. They are, in fact, an example of what William Shatner sang / spoke, because he never really sings. It's a disappointment to Shatner that he has such pathetic singing skills, but he does good on dramatic reading. But he had a song called Has Been on the album called Has Been. And the album is very autobiographical, and part of it is about people mocking his has-been career. This was before he got Emmys for the Boston Legal show, where it's like he's getting rewarded now for his years of acting and production. Because if you look into where the man's early career, significant Shakespearean scholars and Shakespearean actors were saying, this man has got it. This man is going to be a star. He has honed his craft over the decades, but people delight in declaring him a has-been and over. And in this song, he talks about three characters: Never Done Jack, Two Thumbs Down, and Sidekick Don't Say Shit, or Don't Say Dick, who laugh at others' failures when they have not done shit. And his final conclusion of the song is, has been was, has been might again. He's contrasting somebody who's out there constantly swinging versus the people who just like to sit on their couch and pick at you because it's easier for them to pick at your success than to actually do something themselves. Some people call this the crab bucket philosophy, where if you got a bunch of crabs in a bucket, one crab might pull themselves out and go to freedom, but the other crabs keep pulling them down. And a lot of these witch hunters are crabs in the bucket. They're Never Done Jack and Two Thumbs Down, and Sidekick Don't Say Dick. They have decided, and they do whole videos on how you can detect AI. Here are their top 3 ways to detect AI, and there's more, but these are their top 3 ways. You use M dashes, you use long words, and you write in lists of 3. Anne Marie, who did they just describe?
Just about every writer.
And you've edited my work. Who have they described?
Yeah. Oh, you too.
Absolutely. And I went through one of these videos, which is a lot more than the top 3. It's like 90% of their tells for AI essentially amount to, you have an education and are widely read and have a vocabulary. So I'm not a fan of these witch hunters, and Kevin skewers them really well. But that's not why we're talking about Kevin today. Approximately, this would be 14 years ago now, give or take. I don't remember the forum I was on. It might have been the Online Writers Forum or Online Writers Workshop. I met Kevin, and Kevin gave some interesting advice, but he said, if you really want to hear about this, you need to go read Dean, and provided me a link to Dean's blog. And from Dean, I started reading Chris's blog. And from both of them, I learned more about the writers of the future. I didn't know much. I mean, I was around reading when it first came out, but I didn't know any better. And I knew that Larry Niven and Jerry Purnell were judges and had talked about this was a good thing, but I really didn't know much about it until I was reading Dean and Chris, who are also judges. And Dean and Chris were encouraging me to get, and other writers, to submit to Writers of the Future. And eventually I did, and I started getting successes. It took me 3 years to get a win, but I started getting regular finalists, semifinalists, bestseller, and I had others, and I'll talk about those coming up, other successes, which got me to stick with this and have a writing career. And because of that, I know all of you. If it weren't for Kevin, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. So Kevin is on my list of people who made my writing career happen, because otherwise, without Chris and Dean's encouragement, I would have given up before I ever submitted to Writers of the Future. So if you are happy to know me, go buy Kevin's book and read about coffee break novelists and see if it will help you out. But we're really not here for Kevin today. But again, thank you, Kevin. We are really here to talk about this power couple. They write, they edit, they publish. Dean is a best-selling author. He has done a lot in tie-in fiction. He has stopped doing the tie-in fiction because he likes writing his own stuff better. But a few things he's known for. He was a bestseller with a Final Fantasy book, Spirits Within, bestseller with Carnage in New York, a Spider-Man novel. His own Thunder Mountain and Cold Poker series have been best-selling series, USA Today. He's at this point written over 200 novels, short stories, novellas, essays. 2 years back now was Dean heading up to his 70th birthday. So at 69th birthday, he set himself a goal, which to me would be, that's a lot even for me. For Dean, it's like, oh, haven't you done that already? He told himself that in his 70th year, he was going to publish 70 books or anthologies or edit 70 magazines or 70 major essays. And he did it with time to spare because he's big on productivity. So he's got a lot going for him. And in the Writers of the Future, he was the very first person to walk across the winner's stage at the very first Writers of the Future. Now, he was not a winner that first year. He wrote a finalist. The judges that were voting for that quarter did not select it as a winner. And despite that, one of the judges, it might have been Algis himself, said, if we don't give this man a prize, I am going to leave this contest, because they liked his story that much. And that was the invention of the published finalist, where sometimes there's a story that didn't win, but the coordinating judge thinks it's so good it deserved to. And the cool part of being a published finalist, which I, of course, will never be now, is you get award money, or, well, you get published money. You get paid for your story being published. You get an award. You get to go to the workshop. You get to the gala, and you're still eligible. So we have had a small number of published finalists who went on later to win. Dean was the first published finalist, first person ever to cross that stage, and since 2010 has been a judge. Meanwhile, oh, and I didn't list it on here because it isn't necessarily a bestseller, but the first time I read anything from Dean, there was a Star Trek The Next Generation anthology series called Starfleet Corps of Engineers, which was short stories in the Star Trek universe, Next Generation, based on the concept, if you're a Trekkie, this will be a familiar concept, that Mr. Scott, who was discovered and rescued from a transporter place where he'd been hiding out through time, Mr. Scott is put in charge of the Starfleet Corps of Engineers, which were mentioned in, my geek is showing, mentioned in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, when Carol Marcus says, this place, it took the Starfleet Corps of Engineers so long, I don't know how many years to carve this out. So that was the canonical origin of the Starfleet Corps of Engineers. Dean, under Paramount's instruction, of course, turned this into an anthology of stories about the Corps of Engineers going out and solving missions that were in the background of what we saw on the screen all the time. And I love the SE, Star Trek Starfleet Corps of Engineers. I thought those were great. I had no idea that Dean was them until much later. That was Dean. His wife, Chris, is a best-selling author in her own right. Her big ones right now are the Diving series, the Fae series. Fae is a story of modern Fae creatures, fairies. The Retrieval Artist series is a series of sort of archaeological treasure hunting in the future. Smokey Dalton is a mystery series. She's only done over 150 novels compared to Dean's 200 because she's been doing lots of other stuff, short stories, novellas, and essays. She has been a Writers of the Future judge since 2010. And together they have worked on numerous things, three of which were fairly big sales. A Next Generation novel, Invasion, The Soldiers of Fear. Have not read that one. I cannot possibly keep up with all the Next Generation and other Star Trek novels. Just completely more than I can read. Mike Resnick said that at one time back in the 60s, the field was small enough that a good, fast reader could read all of science fiction and fantasy in any given year. Not a chance today. The field has exploded too much. They did the novelization of a TV miniseries called The 10th Kingdom, which I am very, 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 very familiar because I enjoyed it and my late mother loved it and probably watched it 3 times a year. Sadly, that was before the days of Kindle, so getting a copy of it today is just about impossible unless you want to go through used bookstores and pay a lot. But they've talked in the past about adapting it and the fun they had with that. They did the novelization of the first X-Men movie and a bunch of other stuff. So this is them as writers. This is them as editors. Dean has edited numerous projects. I mentioned the Starfleet Corps of Engineers. He also, for I think it was 9 years, ran a contest for Paramount for their publishing arm. I forget whether they published through Pocket Books or I can't remember who the publisher is for the Star Trek stuff. But they ran a contest that he basically set up, which was, and he didn't even try to hide it. It was blatantly copied on Writers of the Future, essentially the same rules, but the only thing you could submit would be Star Trek stories. And so it was a similar contest for people who were trying to make it as new writers by writing Star Trek. And that was an amazing thing. That was just wow, because that is a hard thing to do. Tie-in fiction is really hard. It's under license. This isn't fan fiction, which if you try to publish it and sell it will get you sued. This is actual licensed Star Trek short stories, open only to new writers. That is a dream. If I had known about that contest at the time, you better believe I'd have been submitting and submitting and submitting. He was the editor of that series for 9 years, and then Paramount had a change in ownership, management, whatever, and they cut it out. But for 9 years, he had some really, really, really influential Star Trek stories there for brand new writers. He has also edited and wrote a monthly magazine called Smith's Monthly. So he is the author, Smith, and the editor, Smith. And he is productive enough that he can produce a magazine's worth of stories every month. He has also done themed anthologies that they put together as part of their workshops. Chris also has done some of these themed anthologies. She has also been the editor of Best of Pulp House. Remember I said Pulp House published it came from the coffee maker. Pulp House is a magazine that has a very weird aesthetic. It's kind of more original Twilight Zone than anything else, so it's hard to get in. Essentially, you only get in by invitation. So when Dean asked me for the coffee maker, that was a serious honor. Chris also was for 6 years the editor of Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, which is a magazine she has sold many stories to, because Chris, in fact, has sold more stories than any writer I know other than her in terms of short fiction to the different digests. And so this is something that she took seriously to be the editor of F&SF. And in fact, she is the only person who has won a Hugo both as a writer and as an editor of F&SF. So Chris is an awesome editor. And together, they have edited and published Pulp House. They have a Fiction River series. Fiction River, I mentioned that they have these themed workshops. Fiction River is often stories that come from the attendees of their workshops. They publish their books and these magazines and anthologies and so on through wmgbooks.com. And always, always they're teachers. They, like all of my mentors, which is why I'm so big on this, they are big on the pay it forward ethos. People help them, they help me, I'm helping you, you're helping the next ones in the chain. I was at the Writers of the Future Awards Gala for the 40th anniversary. They always do a big historical video for all the people who've been through the contests and everything, and all the judges and everything. That year they did it bigger because it was the 40th anniversary, and I choked up because as I'm watching that video, I am seeing the history of science fiction up on that screen. All of these judges that I grew up reading their stuff, so many, and I'm seeing all these people I've learned from, and suddenly I saw my place in that chain, and I saw your place, and I realized that I was watching history of the field unfolding, and I had a place in it. They have been part of that as judges for 15 years now. And Dean is a contestant going back all the way to volume one, which would be 42 years ago now. So they've been instructors through that because most of the judges for Writers of the Future come to the workshop week and spend at least an hour teaching the students directly. And then many of them, Dean among them, Chris often doesn't attend. Chris has got some health/allergy issues that almost killed her for several years when she lived in Oregon. And then for whatever reason, I don't remember what the motivation was, they moved to Las Vegas. I think it was because of available health care. And all her issues cleared up. Living in a dry desert climate, she's fine. So Chris doesn't travel a whole lot anymore because traveling is lethal. So she doesn't come to the workshops much. Dean, on the other hand, does. And while he's there, he is teaching anytime he's talking to students. He is teaching in the bar afterwards, what we used to call BarCon, and now they've decided that sounds too frivolous and they've given it some fancier and more respectable name, but I still call it BarCon. He is there. Kevin is there. Rob Sawyer is there. All of these judges are there afterwards, talking and teaching. They also do their own classes through the WMG book site. They have in-person workshops, used to be in Oregon, now so that Chris can breathe, they're in Las Vegas. They also do online workshops on Teachable. They do these online workshops. Generally, they do 4 or 5 new ones in a year, maybe more. I haven't kept count. They are generally, you get a recorded lesson every week with feedback from Chris or Dean on the topic, and then you have exercises you can send in for their feedback, and you get recorded video feedback on the work. And then, for those of us on a budget, because the online workshops, they're good, they're expensive. The classic workshops are the recordings of the online workshops. So you're not going to get a weekly video. You're not going to get the feedback on your work. You just get a list of a bunch of videos and you can binge them at whatever pace works for you. And you can still do the exercises, but don't send them in for assessment. Assess them yourself, but you save a lot of money. So that's some of the training they do. Sometimes teaching at conventions and conferences. And Dean has his blog, very writing focused, but it's not just about writing, which is deanwesleysmith.com. And a lot of the lessons we'll talk about from Dean and Chris today are things I first learned in his blog. So that is a place where you can pick up his lessons. Chris used to have, and she still kind of does, but she's not making as much use of it. She used to have chriswrites.com, which is specifically a business-oriented blog. Dean's is mostly business, but hers was very much a business sort of blog because she, before she became the writer that she is, she ran lots of business and worked for lots of business. So she came into the relationship with deep business experience. And so she would write about this. And one time she sat down as a business person and assessed how she was spending her time and came to the conclusion that even with pay it forward ethos, it was not smart as a business to be giving this away, this content away on her blog. And that's when she opened a Patreon, patreon.com, Kristine Kathryn Rusch, where you can spend a whole $1 per month and get all of her online articles, including some we'll be talking about coming up that I have subscribed specifically so I could read these articles. She was announcing them because she'll announce them on social media with a link, and you can go through it. And Patreon will say, "Well, you're not a subscriber, but you can read this article for $3." I'm like, I need to read that article, so I'd pay for $3, and then I'd ask her some questions. And then in the third such article, she called me out and said specifically, "Martin, stop paying $3 an article and just pay $1 a month." Okay, I can do that math, and I can listen when my mentors tell me things. So if you want some good insights into the business of writing, go give Chris $1 a month and join her Patreon. And we'll come back to that one. So, little biographical information on the two of them. Not a lot. This is all public stuff. I'm not digging into their trash or anything. Dean went to college, originally studying, I think he studied architecture first, then went to law. It might have been the other way around. But in the meantime, he was golfing because he liked it and because he was pretty much a good one at the low pro or high am level and could actually make some money at it. And similarly, he was playing poker. And again, Dean has played at the professional level, not those top levels with the $1 million jackpots, but Dean has made some serious money as playing poker. And he learns lessons from that because, like I say about things, it's all research. He draws writing lessons from that. He has been selling fiction since 1976. He has been selling fiction. He struggled with it for a while until he found a method that worked for him. And we'll talk about that method. Not saying it's the right method. Tools, not rules. It worked for him. Again, recently he did 70 books, magazines, essays for his 70th year. Married Chris in 92. Chris got her BA at University of Washington. Spent some time as a freelance journalist. Is that Washington? I think it's University of Wisconsin. I think that's a typo because she's from Wisconsin originally. Became a freelance journalist, which got her into radio reporting and eventually news director. That got her into editorial assistant, where she learned a lot of ugly things about how this business is run. Let me give you one example of why she is extremely skeptical about publishers, even though she works with them, about the goodwill of publishers. She was working with the editor on some sale of some writer to the business, and the editor told her to go back into the files and pull out contract M. She's like, "What's that?" "Well, just go to the file and pull out contract M." Brings it back to the editor, and sometime after, the editor says, "Okay, he didn't fall for this one, so go get me contract K." And she brought that back, and she realized that M and K implies L and J and I and H and all the way to A. That these contracts were literally in order from, this is the contract we will give our top selling author because they know what they're doing and we can't get the book if we don't offer that one, all the way down at least to M for suckers. They knew M was a contract for suckers. They had the better contracts right there ready to go if the author balked. They weren't paying legal to rewrite a contract if it had problems. It had already been rewritten. They just didn't bother giving a good one to somebody who might fall for a bad one. We'll come back to that. I keep saying we'll come back to that. We will come back to that. And again, married Dean in 1992 and began the long collaborating career. All right, they were collaborating before then, but that's when it was official collaboration as a married couple. See something in chat real quick. Let me go look at that. Drier climate. Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, this is supposed to be, if I hadn't tapped ahead accidentally, a big list of their books. And it's by no means an exhaustive list. They've got about 20 books, 26 books on writing. These are just a few of the ones I wanted to talk about. some of the ones I've learned from, and some of the ones I've read bits and pieces from. This one was the first Dean book I ever read. And Dean won't mind me giving you a quick overview of this because, yes, I think paying for their books is probably a good thing to do if you have some money to throw their way. But Dean writes most of his business books on his blog first, and he never deletes the old articles. So they're all out there. You can find them. That's how I did the research. And this was the first one. This is in the time where self-publishing was really just starting to become something everybody was talking about. And a lot of people were saying, no, 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 you will fail because, and they had all these what Dean called myths. Okay, he calls them sacred cows in the title, but he called them myths, things that, quote, everybody knows, unquote, about the publishing business that aren't necessarily true at all. So let's take a look. And I could not on his blog find number 5 and number 10 for some reason, but I can give you a bunch of them. Hello. Hello. There we go. The number 1, where have you heard this before? There's only one right way to do anything in publishing. This lesson from Dean I took to heart. This is tools, not rules. And so he's trying to warn you that people telling you the one true path are wrong, including him. He's not trying to tell you the true path. He's telling you paths. A big one is that writing fast is bad. And I've kind of talked about this before. Dean has run into lots of people who say that fast writing is axiomatically bad writing. And we got an episode coming up on the Bradbury method. Bradbury wrote most of his short fiction in a day and polished it up over a week and sent it out. And if it sold, it likely won awards. Not everything sold, that's a separate matter. But he was writing fast. Dean has become very big on writing fast. He's not saying you have to write fast, but the myth in the industry is that fast is bad. And he's trying to tell you fast is what fast writers do. Slow is what slow writers do. And trying to write slow because somebody told you fast is bad can kill your writing. And related to that, you'll hear often people saying you must rewrite to make something good. And in fact, it's often shortened to cliche, writing is rewriting. My niece heard that from her high school English teacher. Writing is rewriting. Excuse me, high school English teacher, how much fiction have you sold? Oh, you're telling us what your creative writing instructor in college told you. How much fiction have they sold? Oh, they're telling you what they get told at the creative writing conferences. Yes, some people benefit from rewrites and some people won't. I'm going to use a little crudity from Dean's mentor, who I never got to study under, but I got to study under a lot of his students, Algis Budrys, the first judge of Writers of the Future. No matter how many times you stir a piece of shit, it's still a piece of shit. Rewriting won't necessarily make something good. Now remember, tools, not rules. There's some people where rewriting is a serious part of their process. But what he's saying is, do not believe someone who tells you you must rewrite. That's the only way. Number 4, you must have an agent to sell a book. This one's interesting because many publishers will tell you we only take agented submissions. So you think, well, then I have to have an agent. Not necessarily, because there are other publishers who will take unagented submissions, and they're talking about submissions, which are not necessarily the only way to get books in the hands of publishers. Very often, you can meet them in a social environment, such as a convention, get a relationship with an editor, and that relationship leads to, at some point, if they begin to believe in you, hey, send me that, or send me your 3 chapters. You will see lots of cases of people who've sold books without agents. Some of them then promptly get an agent to work on negotiating the contract. But the idea that you must go get an agent before you can sell a book can block you. Number 6, I laugh a little bit because he had a typo in the chapter title, because none of us are perfect. That should be EN Schurz, not IN Schurz. But the myth that selling to a big publisher ensures quality. Big publishers publish a lot of junk. And sometimes, as they've been cutting editorial staff, they publish a lot of semi-edited junk. Many writers have stories of the publisher, the editor, editing their good stuff into junk because some copy editor came along and it's like, well, I know what this is supposed to be, so that's what I'm going to be, going to change it to. Yes, big publishers can do quality work. They can do junk. Self-publishers can do quality work, and they can do junk. The idea that it must be good because a big publisher published it has never been true, and it's less true than ever today. Number 7, we sometimes call this writing to market or writing to trend. You have to write what is hot if you're going to sell. If you like writing that, then write that. If romantasy is your thing, write romantasy. But if romantasy isn't your thing, but you're seeing that it's selling all over the place, then you're going to force yourself to write romantasy. You're not going to sell it. You're going to fail. And often when you're trying to write what's hot, by the time you figure out how to do it, the market's moved on. Number 8, you can't make a living with your fiction. And that's often backed up by some big study out of, I don't know, The Guardian or some place like that, where they talk about the average income of a writer is like $150 or some pathetic number. Yeah, that's because they're counting every single person who ever submitted a story. They are counting people who, yes, they aren't going to make it, but it's a long tail. You've got this huge spike of never gonnas. And then you've got the long tail of people who are going to do something with it. They're not saying you will, but they're saying people can. And there's the myth that you can't. You might. You won't know if you listen to the myth because you'll just give up. So the idea that you can't make a living with your fiction, I will argue that you're already on the far positive side of that curve, even though it is a big spike with a long tail. The very fact that you are taking classes and reading up on the topic already puts you ahead of a lot of the people that are getting polled in those polls. And then number 9, because again, I couldn't find number 10. Fiction writing has to be hard or it's not good. You have to be a suffering artist. You have to be tormented and sweat over it for years and so on. And you certainly can't have any fun out of it. It's like, well, all my mentors have fun doing this. Their fiction writing isn't hard. Sometimes there are hard challenges, but the writing itself is a joy. So those are some of his myths about traditional publishing that he tried to skewer in that book. Then, after he did that one, he said, but you know, there's a lot of myths going out about indie publishing too. So why don't I stomp on a few of those and try to make people understand that it's not a gold rush just waiting for you to step in and make millions. It's hard work just like traditional is, but it's different myths. Now, this is a book from 2013. Both of these are from 2013. He is revising them currently because myths change over time. So some of these myths actually are outdated. But here are, this one I managed to get all 10 myths. Can't get their books into bookstores. It's harder. People do it. If you go to Superstars Writing Seminars in Colorado Springs in February, which is a great conference taught by many of my mentors, they talk about techniques for this. It's hard work. You can't just sit on your butt and wait for them to order your book. You have to do some things. but people do it. The self-publishing is easy. It gets easier with practice, let's put it that way. It ain't easy. No one buys new writers. Well, there are 8 billion people on this planet. You really only need 1 out of 1 million to like your stuff, and you're going to be a bestseller. Now, you're probably not going to get 1 out of a million, but there are people who will buy your stuff. You need an agent to sell overseas. And they talk about how, no, there are people who do it without the agent. A good agent might help, but it's not something you need to have. It's an additional tool in your toolbox. Your printers, CreateSpace, which is now Kindle Print, or I forget what the other one was, but these different printing companies are not distributors. Yes, they can be ordered through the companies, but people aren't going to find your books that way. You have to be helping people to find them and helping them to order it. Have to sell books quickly. Indie goes extremely to the other end of traditional with this attitude of have to be quick on everything. Have to be, have to be, have to be. It's like, be quick if you're quick. Don't stress yourself to try to be quick. But the biggest thing is they think if the books don't sell now, then they're not selling. This is, in fact, a mentality back from the traditional days that Dean calls the produce model. In traditional publishing, especially if they're selling in like retail places like Walmart and such, they want churn on those books. It's like produce. It's like bananas go bad if you have them on the shelf for 2 weeks. They have this attitude that they want that sort of turnover in the books as well. And so the mentality has developed that, man, if I'm not a bestseller out the door, I've failed. Well, your virtual shelves, the catalog listings, the Amazon listings are out there forever. You can sell books a long time after that peak. I've missed the boat. This one is kind of an out-of-date myth itself, because this book again was 2013 when self-publishing was really taking off, and some people are saying, I already missed the gold rush, so therefore I shouldn't bother because I can't sell anything. Well, the gold rush really is gone. It now, because there was a time when you self-published anything halfway decent, people were desperate and would find it and buy it. Now you have to get your attention yet, but you haven't missed the boat. There are still readers out there. There are still places where readers gather. You haven't missed the boat. If you want to do this, don't feel like you've missed your chance. Selling books cheaply, people have the tendency when they're new to think, my stuff is new, my stuff isn't proven, my stuff is low quality, so I should only charge 99 cents for this. And people look at that and say, well, if it's 99 cents, it can't be any good. So he's arguing of pricing your books competitively, even when you're new. And surprisingly enough, here comes our tools, not rules way. The argument that there's only one way to publish a book. There are bunches, each with their strengths and weaknesses. That was the second Dean book I ever read, second Dean nonfiction book I ever read. The first Chris book I ever read, one I highly recommend, The Right Attitude. It's not quite a theme like Killing the Sacred Cows. It's a bunch of essays on thinking about your writing career. And these are the chapter titles, but the titles could mislead you, because some of these titles are things you need to work on, and some of them are things you should stop listening to. So I'm going to have to go over them one at a time, and some of them are, this is good, and some of them are, stop that. Number 1 is on the power of habits, and not just writing habits, but the habits in your life can help determine how much time you have for your writing. And she talks about some of her habits that were getting in her way and how they changed them. Related to that is the importance of routines. Now, I'm bad at this. I don't really have routines. When I was regularly commuting to and from the office, I had a routine. Dictate on the way there, dictate on the way back. I'm now mostly working from home, so that went my one routine. I'm not as good at routines and I still get stuff done. But she's talking about how routines make it easier to get stuff done because your brain is in the right place at the right time. So there's value. Now, here's one of the ones she said, stop that. She read a review where somebody was talking fairly positively about a book that they said the author churned it out. This made her mad for so many reasons. One is even though they gave it a relatively positive review, it was a romance book and the reviewer was dripping with condescension because it was a romance book. And this gets her angry because romance gets a lot of condescension, even though romance is the dominant genre in the fiction world. Romance is big enough genre that it has its own subgenres that are other genres. You have romance westerns, romance science fiction, romance fantasy that are every bit solid romance or western or science fiction or fantasy or whatever, but the subgenre is in service to the main genre of the romance. So it upset her because of the condescension, but it also upset her because of the implication that writing it fast meant it was junk. Sound familiar? Dean talks about this a lot. That just because it was written fast, it was bad. And so she's trying to banish, if she can't banish it from reviewers, she wants to banish it from your lexicon. Do not ever think about you churn something out. Because real churning is hard, tedious drudgery. Don't do that. If you're hating it that much, go write something else. But if you wrote it quickly, don't belittle it by calling it something you churned out. Related to that, getting by. Don't just say, well, I did this to get by, but I didn't really have my heart in this. She'd rather have you writing the books you have your heart in. Roots related to that, following the crowd. Dean talked about writing to trends. Following the crowd can make you reach a point where you are losing any passion for the writing, and passion is what should be driving you. Indispensable is one that I think we could all look forward to this, but it has its own traps. Indispensable is certain writers who are valued for who they are as much or more than what they write. And so the example she uses is if you are trying to sell a book to the mass audience, and you can get a Bradbury story and put Bradbury's name on the cover, Bradbury is indispensable for that market. But if you're writing a genre book, it might be Le Guin or Ellison because you're aiming for an audience that's a little more known for doing top work in that area. But the trick and the trap of being indispensable is, first of all, it can overwhelm you because they want so much of work. And second of all, it starts becoming less about the quality of your work than about your reputation. And it's good to have a reputation. I would love to have a reputation where somebody considered me indispensable, but she makes an argument for why it's a double-sided coin there. Beginner's luck is something that affects a lot of writers. When they succeed really well early, they start thinking they're just naturally good and they stop learning. One phone call from our knees is the fact that any one of us might get that phone call tomorrow from a family member and you've just lost somebody, or from a doctor and you've got really bad news that they want to talk to you about, or from your accountant who has run away with all your money, or and it's about the resiliency of recognizing that these things happen, and first it's not your failure when all of a sudden after they happen you can't write, but then it's about the resilience to eventually use that to come back. And in fact, she has another book up there and behind it, Writing with Chronic Illness, because she spent a lot of years with chronic illness, talking about how to write around the illness. Controlling the creatives is one where she's really talking about the gatekeepers, especially not even the publishing gatekeepers, the community gatekeepers who want to decide what you are and aren't allowed to write, and how to give them as many middle fingers as you can find. Believing in yourself. A lot of people are going to try to be the crabs dragging you back into the bucket. And she's talking about if you're prone to that, you are going to fail. You need to find ways to trust yourself first and other writers in your field who are promoting you next. Don't be listening to the naysayers. Out all of you is kind of related to that of keeping people who don't have your career as their primary goal from directing your career. The example she uses from this is Sally Field, who, of course, those of us a little older have grown up with Sally Field in the movies and before that, television, and how she was at a point where she was a successful star, going back, really showing the age here. I watched this show in the original on a TV show called Gidget, where she was the cute teen with the interesting point of view and broke the fourth wall to talk to the audience and everything. And it was an okay thing for a teen to be having that kind of a career. And she wanted a movie career. And her agent and her manager and all the people in her life are like, don't give up what you have. It's so good. And she fired them all because they weren't worried about what she wanted in her career. They were worried about playing it safe. They could only see that. And how she then went on to have a pretty successful acting career in the movies and is still, I think, still making movies today. But she did it because she took all the people who weren't thinking of her career out of her life. And tying into the last one, being the writer you want to be. Be the person you want to be, writing the things you want to be writing, not what somebody's telling you you should be. There's kind of a theme through this. This is a good motivational book with lots of motivational essays. All right. And this one is the controversial one. This one is the one that gets Dean yelled at more than just about anybody, but not by me. What do we have in the chat? Love Gidget. Bex May. Yes. Oh, Gidget was absolutely fun. No question about it, but it wasn't a career. And she was worrying about her career, not the, hey, I'm making good money and I'm on TV every week and everybody knows me. She wanted to be more than that. All right. So, Heinlein's Rules. This is a book Dean wrote based on rules that Heinlein wrote. And these rules are sadly controversial, and Dean took the controversy on head on and also updated them for the modern world because the world is different from when Heinlein wrote the rules originally. The other thing to keep in mind is Heinlein never said, these are how you write good fiction. He said, these are how you build a business writing fiction. These are how you make a living writing fiction. He wrote these in an address to the Naval Academy of all things. Heinlein was a naval officer who was eventually discharged because of health issues. I think it was TB. But he was still in the reserves when World War II came along, and he was activated along with Isaac Asimov and who was the third one? Was it Clark? I don't know if it was Clark, but there were three science fiction writers who were called in to basically do engineering work in secret projects for the military, helping to sort of run these. So he definitely had his Navy connection his entire life. That was important to him. So he got invited to speak to the Naval Academy at I think it was a graduation event. And he talked a lot about leadership and stuff. But eventually he's like, but they brought me here as a writer. And so I'm going to tell you my 5 rules of how I make a business out of writing. And Heinlein actually talked about them to some degree and actually pre-argued a lot of the controversy, but people don't listen to that because they just want to argue with Heinlein. So here are the 5 rules. Hello. Hello. There we go. You must write. If you're going to make a living at writing, you better write. I don't think anyone argues much with this one. You must finish what you start. I'm going to argue a little on this one. I think you've heard me talk about before. Some of the things you write are just practice. But if you're going to make a living at it, you can't afford to be practicing all day. You've got to be finishing stuff or nobody's going to pay for it. And then comes rule number 3. And this is where the world blows up. You must refrain from rewriting except to editorial order. Editorial order means an editor saying, I will buy this story if you make these changes. It isn't your friend saying you could do this better. It isn't you saying, I wonder if I could do that better. It's not your agent. It is a paying editor saying, if you fix this, I have money. Now, people argue with this one tremendously because they have the mantra, writing is rewriting. You don't get paid for rewriting. You get paid for writing. Dean likes to say, shouldn't need to rewrite it. Write it the right way first. Now, Heinlein, in the address that included these rules, followed this up with saying, that doesn't mean you shouldn't go through and find typos. That doesn't mean you shouldn't go through and find logical inconsistencies and so on. Rewriting is doing major parts all over again that you've already done. You should just move on because as a business, you can't afford to be constantly reworking. And I actually learned this lesson long before I met Dean. I'd read it in Heinlein's books, but I hadn't learned it as a writer until I was writing my very first book, which I'm pretty sure none of you have read because most of you are not software developers working with the unified modeling language, which is one of my specialties. But I was tasked to write a book on the unified modeling language for the .NET programming environment. And I had all sorts of ideas I wanted to do. I wanted to make this perfect. I wanted to do everything right. And I had one point where I realized, finally, that for a month, I had rewritten chapter 1, page 1, paragraph 1, sentence 1, every single day for a month. To the point where I couldn't even remember what it had started out with, and where I was almost certainly rewriting it to things I had already written it to. And I remembered Heinlein's rules, and I suddenly came to a realization. Different isn't better, it's just different. And you are a different person every single day you write with different preferences and different ideas. And I could literally have rewritten that sentence every day for the rest of my life because every day I was in a different mood, in a different frame of mind. I finished the book when I put away sentence 1, paragraph 1, page 1, chapter 1, and just started writing. And that's the rewriting that he's saying, you shouldn't be doing this. You should refrain. You should be trying to keep producing new content if your business is producing content. And this rule gets people screaming from the rooftops. Your stuff isn't that good. You have to fix it. I'm not telling you they're wrong. I'm not telling you he's wrong. But that is the fundamental distinction. His argument was get it done and move on to the next one. Their argument is you won't be able to do this if you don't do the rewriting. And the other two, you have to put it on the market and keep it on the market. We'll come back to those two. But I was at a point in my career I had discovered Dean. I had learned some things from him. I was really, really, really saying this, a lot of this makes sense. But I'm not sure about these Heinlein rules things, even though they had helped me write my first nonfiction book. I'm not sure because it feels like if I rewrite it, it's better. And Dean comes back at me and says, how do you know it's better? Well, because it is. I can read it. How do you know? What makes you a judge of better of your own work? And that sounds weird, but I really didn't have a good answer. Maybe somebody else would have liked the other version better. How do you really know? That's an editor's job, is to know better. It's like, okay, I'll think about it. I'll think about it. But then I've been listening to Dean. I've been trying to think about it, but I really wasn't getting anywhere. I was failing. After literally decades of I'd write something, get a rejection, and give up for years at a time. This time I was serious about writing. This time I was going to do it. This time I was serious, but I wasn't getting anywhere. It wasn't working no matter what I tried. I wasn't, please don't hate me. I didn't realize how foolish I was when I said this. I'd been going at it for 6 whole months and I hadn't sold anything yet. I was that naive that I felt like 6 months of really hard trying, I should have succeeded by now. Sorry, the ego is what the ego is. So I'm listening to Dean and I'm trying to focus on new content. And I'd been inspired to get back into writing by Jack McDevitt's Alex Benedict books and also his Priscilla Hutchins books. But the Alex Benedict especially were the ones that I just love them. I'm re-listening to them on Audible books now. I just love them. They made me want to write again, particularly the one I just finished listening to. So it's like, I really, really, really like Jack's work. He made me want to write. And his book, Echo, was coming out. And Echo came out, and I'm reading through it, and I'm about at the end of Act 2, and I know how this book ends. I can see the whole thing. I can do this. I can see the whole thing. I am going to know exactly what happens. When this book finishes, I'm going to be so smugly happy with myself. And I was completely and utterly, totally wrong. But I didn't care. That ending that I saw was a great ending. That was a story that needed to be told. And so I sat down over a long Thanksgiving weekend and I told it. I wrote a 14,000 word story over that weekend with new backstory because I couldn't use Jack's backstory. That would be plagiarism. I couldn't, well, it wouldn't be quite plagiarism, but it would be stealing. I couldn't do that, so I had to remake a new backstory, and I had to put this story together. And I wrote 14,000 words in a weekend, and I listened to Dean, and I sent it out to Asimov's because I didn't know if it was going to be better if I kept worrying over it. I might as well try. I sent it off to Asimov's, and then a week, 2 weeks later, I still hadn't sold anything. It was 6 months. What was going wrong here? And so I decided at that point, I'm never going to make it as a writer. I know Dean has told me to do these things, put it on the market and keep it there until it sells, but it's not working. It's time I be honest with myself, give up this childish vision and just go to what I know, which is programming. And I know specifically .NET programming for Windows and also for Windows Mobile, Windows phones. I know this stuff really well. I could write some Windows Phone games and I could make some money at that because I'm good at that. But I gave myself a deadline. On January 1st, because this was after Thanksgiving, remember, on January 1st, if I have not sold a thing by January 1st, I put the writing books away, I put everything away, I pick up the Windows Phone programming books and learn to write some games because I have some ideas. Until then, I had a rule here. Rule 5, keep it on the market until it sells. Now, Dean and many others have argued, and I don't disagree with them in principle, I'm just lazy. That when it comes back rejected, you send it to the next market. Comes back rejected, send it to the next market. Comes back rejected, send it to the next market. I was a little lazy for that. My modification of this was every Saturday night, every story in my queue has to be out to a market. So if it comes back rejected on a Tuesday, I can still wait until Saturday to send it out. That was my plan, that I'm going to send things out on Saturdays up until January 1st, when that's it, I'm done. I know Dean told me to try, but I'm not going to make it. Not going to happen. But I'd sent the Mother Anthony off to Asimov's, and it came back rejected on December 31st. Not January 1st. If it came back January 1st, I'm done. It came back on December 31st. I'm not done yet. And that particular year, December 31st was a Saturday, which means the story has to go out by my own self-imposed rules. And I was like, where do I send this? I get on Duotrope to look for markets, and I see this listing for Writers of the Future that Dean has talked about a lot, Chris has talked about a lot, Jerry Purnell, one of my other writing mentors and inspirations and favorite writers, has talked a lot about Writers of the Future. And it has a quarterly deadline. The deadline is December 31st. That day, a Saturday. I owe it to myself. I owe it to Dean. I promised that anything on a Saturday was going out until I gave up. So I sent it out on that Saturday, December 31st, sent it out to Writers of the Future. On January 1st, I put my books away and I started studying Windows game programming. By mid-March, I had sold, I think it was $50 worth of Windows games in 3 months from starting at ground zero on January 1st. So it's like, that's doing okay. And I get this call from this Joni Labaki woman from Writers of the Future. Oh yeah, I had literally forgotten I'd sent a story to them. I knew next to nothing about it. And she calls to tell me that the Mother Anthony is a finalist. I'm like, what's a finalist? If you're not familiar with Writers of the Future, like I wasn't, that means it's one of the top 8 out of thousands that they got in that quarter. Like, my story was top 8. Yeah, and the judges are going to now look at those 8 and pick 3 to be the winners for this quarter. My story was top 8. Yeah, but it's going to be a while. It might take a month, and sometimes it does take that long. But you had one of the top 8 out of thousands. Well, thank you. And now I start researching what the contest is about, learning all sorts of things about it, figuring it out, realizing that it really was top 8 out of thousands. I had done something, and a month later I get the call from Joni saying, well, sorry, yours wasn't one of the top 3. You didn't win, but Jerry Purnell thought you should have. Huh? Yeah, Jerry thought this maybe was the best story in the quarter. It was either best or second best, but he kind of thought it was the best. He loved your story. Jerry Purnell loved my story. You got this backwards, right? You're talking about me loving Jerry Purnell. No, Jerry loved your story. He really thought it was good. And that was when I realized that the biggest thing holding me back was I gave up too easily. And that's the day I stopped giving up. I gave up on giving up. And my whole career stems from that, which stems from Dean, which stems from Kevin McLaughlin. But it also stems from Heinlein's rules, because I did not rewrite a thing other than typos and grammar nits on that story before I sent it off to Asimov's, and did not touch a thing before I sent it off to Writers of the Future. I'm not telling you Heinlein's rules are right for you. I'm saying they are tools in your toolbox. Give them a try. You might find that you have a better grasp of story in your hindbrain than you realize. That's Dean's argument, is that you, for 20, 30, 40, however many years you've been around consuming stories, You know what story is, but you think too hard about it. You listen to too much feedback. You listen to your logical brain as opposed to your story brain. And you are therefore undermining your own sense of story. Now, am I going to say that this is the way you must write? No. But when I started following Heinlein's Rule 3 is when I started selling. Most of my stories have little to no plan in them. The plan develops as I'm writing, and they have little to no rewriting. Um, Dean, okay, Dean says he does no rewriting. We'll talk about that. But I consider Dean to be a 1.5 draft writer. I am a 2 draft writer where my first draft is dictated, my second draft is cleaning up the dictation. And at one point, Duotrope was saying that I was selling 20% of what I submitted. And that put me in one of the top writers in their system they were tracking. 20% is pretty good. And it was by just write the story and get it out there. And instead of trying to polish it forever, trying to polish that turd, write the next one and get it out there. So Dean talks a lot about that in this book, and he talks a lot about the arguments over that. He's trying to provide you the information so you can decide. For me, it's working. So those are some of their books. I won't talk in that much detail about the rest of them, but let me give you some high points of them. The ones immediately above that, Writing into the Dark and How to Write a Novel in 10 Days, are both on the same topic. And honestly, he's got a couple more on these, where he will sometimes be contracted to write a book on a deadline. He will never tell you the book, because very often it's a ghost written book that he is contractually not allowed to tell you the book. But he describes day to day his writing process and proceeds to write the book and tell you the steps he went through in 10 days or 7 days or a month. Writing into the Dark is the best one I felt for describing his process, and why I call him a 1.5 drafter, although he doesn't. He has this concept he calls cycling. One of the things you'll hear people say when they say, you can't be a pantser, you have to be an outliner, you have to plan ahead. What happens if you paint yourself into a corner? Well, there are no corners. Nobody's got any corners. I can't see corners as far as the eye can see. What you have is places where, gee, I could get to this next step if. This guy could outwit the criminal if he had his gun with him. Okay, why doesn't he have his gun? And Dean goes back and cycles back to chapter 3 where, oh, he left the house without the gun. So he calls this cycling back. And he puts the gun into the story there and has the guy put it in his glove box so that somewhere around chapter 11, as he's getting out of the car, it's like, oh, I better get the gun. And he sticks it in his holster and he goes in and he gets back to the point in the story where he needed the gun to solve the problem. And now the guy has the gun. This cycling back to add in the things you needed or to change the things that are blocking you is why I consider it kind of a half draft. But that's his technique, which he describes really well in Writing into the Dark. The Magic Bakery, Chris and Dean are really big on copyright. We'll talk about that. The Magic Bakery is a metaphor that Dean uses to try to explain your rights under copyright. And I'll give you the high-level version. Again, you can find the Magic Bakery on his blog, or you can buy the book. But the basic idea is the way intellectual property works, unless you're foolish enough to sell Amazon the rights forever to a given story because the money was so good. But the general way is you never sell your work. You license rights for an explicit purpose, for an explicit length of time. Those rights eventually revert back, and you can sell that pie again. He uses the pie as the metaphor, that you can take that pie that you baked and you can license it to somebody and come back. Or you can license parts of it to somebody. So you can license the English language rights, but not the French rights. Or you can license the audiobook rights separate. All these different ways you can slice up that pie and make money off of just pieces, and then turn around and resell the pieces later. And so it's an extended metaphor. He explains it in a lot more depth than that. It's a good book. As an example, some of you have read my story, Today I Am Paul. Wrote that now 13 years ago, I think. It showed up in Clark's World, got a lot of attention, ended up in 4 years' best anthologies that year. Every one of them paid me. They only paid a penny a word, as opposed to, I think Clark's World was paying 6 cents a word then. But reprints are always paid less. But I've got 6 cents a word for Clark's World to publish it. And now I got 4 cents a word for it to be published in 4 years' best anthologies. And then it got republished in an anthology from Neil Clark, the publisher of Clark World, who wanted it in a themed anthology on humans and robots. And then it got, and then it got, and then it got, and then it got, and then it got. That story, I've lost track. I want to say at this point, it has earned me back in the neighborhood of 18 cents per word in resales. Plus, it got the Washington Science Fiction Association Small Press Award. The prize for that, I think, was $250. And a couple years back now, it was actually many more years than that, but it finally was published a couple of years back. There was a instructor in University of Illinois, I think, or might have been Kentucky. There were 2 instructors working together, and one was Illinois and one was Kentucky, were teaching a class on using science fiction to teach ethics, particularly in the technology field, because science fiction explores ideas, some of which you can't necessarily do as controlled experiments in a lab, but you can explore the concepts. And Today I Am Paul, a lot of it revolves around medical ethics of caretaking. And they said, we're teaching this as part of the workshop here, part of the class. And they didn't have to pay me anything for that because they're using places where they can legitimately get copies for academic purposes. And I'm not complaining about any of that. Then they said, but we are now getting ready to publish a textbook that we can now sell to other instructors and classes all across the country. And now we want to republish your book or your story in our book. Would you be agreeable? I'm like, well, first of all, you know my ego. Of course I am. But second of all, they start talking about the honorarium. And they said that Ken Liu were publishing one of his stories as well. And Ken Liu agreed to a $300 honorarium. Is that acceptable? It's like, $300 for a 5,000 word story that I was originally paid 6 cents a word for. So that was $300. So they're basically offering to pay me again what the story was originally paid. Because I understand copyright, I have the opportunity to resell that story that many times. I have literally lost track of how many times it is resold at this point, because Dean taught me about my Magic Bakery rights. So that's a good book for that. Chris's book on Freelance Survival Guide is more than just writing. She's been a freelancer most of her career, so it's got lots of tips of money management, brand management, and so on. I mentioned her book on writing with chronic illness, which is very helpful for something a lot of us are going to run into. Her book on how writers fail was based on some blogs she did a couple of years back, where she started seeing some recurring patterns of failure that she felt like if people just knew about these, they could plan for them. Closing the Deal on Your Terms is, I think, an extract actually from Freelancer Survival Guide. Chris is very big on contracts and explaining contracts to you. And so this is a book where she gets into that topic in some specific detail. I'm going to tell you right now that Chris and Dean have both evolved in the time I've been following them. In 13 and 12 and 11, when I started reading them, they had an attitude of two things. One is traditional publishing isn't going to go away. Anybody telling you that is trying to sell you something. But indie self-publishing has got all sorts of opportunities it didn't used to have because it's become easier. Today, they would probably say the traditional publishing isn't dead, but why would you anymore? Because you get so much more control of your rights if you go indie. And so many of the contracts in traditional are getting worse. Why would you do that? So that's been one evolution. Another is back in 2011, and so they said not everybody needs an agent, and they talked about reasons why they didn't have agents. But if you want one, here's what you should look out for. And they would tell agent horror stories, and there are lots of agent horror stories. And they would tell ways that agents had abused their own authors. Today, their attitude is pretty much, what's an agent doing for you that you can't do yourself? There are places out there you can learn how to do all of this. What's an agent doing that you can't do yourself? And if your answer is, well, they're reading the contract, oh boy, are they going to fill your ears with how agents have screwed up contracts and how agents are not legally responsible for screwing up your contract. The beauty of a lawyer is ethically under canon of law. When you pay a lawyer for advice, if it's bad advice, you can sue that lawyer for damages. If your agent gives you bad advice, you pretty much can't. And in fact, many agents in many jurisdictions, by giving you advice on a contract, are actually violating the law. They are legally not allowed to do that, but nobody calls them on it because a lot of people don't know. And people are, even if they know their agent has done things that weren't for their help, they're afraid to lose their agent. And so they're not going to call out the agent for this. So Chris and Dean have gone from, you can have an agent, I suppose, to why would you? I'm not at that point, but be aware that they are going to strongly argue that you are always better paying an attorney, an IP attorney, a copyright attorney up front to evaluate the contract than relying on an agent who might not know what they're talking about. If you want to hear really about agent scams and agent misbehavior, go through older episodes. I haven't read recent episodes, but older installments in Laura Resnick's blog. Laura was one of the first writers I knew to completely abandon agents because her agents were screwing her over. And she started gathering these stories of bad agent behavior. One of her agents had a book that Laura wanted sent to a particular editor, and that agent didn't want to send it. That agent didn't think it was good enough, didn't think it would sell, thought, hey, it's a waste of my time, and it's only going to discredit me with that editor. Because one of the things about agents that can get you into trouble is they represent other writers too, and maybe bigger writers. And so they want to preserve their relationship with the editor so that they can sell the books by the big writer more than they want to sell the book by you. And this agent just really didn't want to send that book, but Laura insisted. So the agent sent the book to the editor with a note that said, I'm sending you this because the author insists on it, and I don't think you're going to like it, but it'll get her off my back. Not knowing that that editor was a very good friend of Laura's and proceeded to tell her exactly that. So Laura went anti-agent a lot earlier than Chris and Dean. Also in that basic area, and this is sadly old. It was funny at the time. Now it's sad. At the time, there was a site out there called Bad Agent Sydney, which was trying to demonstrate through humor bad agent behavior. by demonstrating the bad agent Sidney T. Cat. Yes, C-A-T. Sidney was a cat. That the author was writing stories, writing essays from Sidney's point of view as a cat who is a very bad agent. And all of these stories were based on true events, filtered through Sidney's sarcastic, I hate my clients, but I love their money point of view. And it's a great, great, great archive of really bad agent behavior with humor. Unfortunately, back in 2011, Sidney was an older cat with health issues. So, as you can guess, in 2025, Sidney's no more. So, as you read the archives, it's sad making because it's a lost pet. But if you can forget that, Sydney has a lot to teach about ways agents actually screw things up. And that's not even getting to scam agents like Writer Beware talks about. These are quote unquote legitimate agents. I'm sorry, I'm way off on a tangent now because I like my agent. He's not perfect, but I like a lot of things about my agent. He got me that detail for those short stories, remember. But there are some real bad ones out there. So Chris and Dean are likely to say, hey, what's an agent doing for you? Why do you need it? This next one isn't from Chris and Dean, but they're going to recommend it almost anytime you talk to them. Copyright Handbook, a new edition comes out every few years. I think this is the 2024 edition, which teaches the copyright business. It's very long, it's tedious, it's not an easy read, but it's a good reference to look up topics. It's just trying to read it front to back will put you to sleep. But if you don't learn copyright, you can get taken in all sorts of ways. And I've been promising that we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about that later. It's time for me to talk about that later. And I don't like this one because it's friends of mine who have no power over this, but are caught in the middle of it. Analog and Asimov's and fantasy and science fiction and Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine and Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine have all been bought by one publishing company, which seemed like a good thing because they've all been struggling financially. Everybody's been wondering, are they going to stay in business? And Analog, I think, is like 75 years it's been out now. So it's like probably longer, 75. I'm sorry, I'm old. 75 years would be 1950, and Analog was around good 12, 15 years earlier than that. Analog's been around forever, although it used to be called Astounding. Company with a long history. People were wondering if it's stay in business. If a new publisher's buying them, they've got to be serious about it. And Chris has started to see the contracts they're sending out now. Because lots of people, and you can do this too, lots of people can tap Chris on the shoulder and say, what do you think of this contract? She's not going to necessarily comment on your contract publicly, but she will very likely look for things to look for. And the contracts that are coming out of this new publisher are not the ones that used to come out from these magazines in the past. They have some very subtle rights grabs, ways that they can have ownership of your property into the future without paying a penny more. Used to be in Analog, in any contract you got, you had some things that they could do and you had no say over it, but they'd pay you money. If they got that issue of the magazine that you were in, because it was always the issue you're in, if they got it translated into another language, they had the explicit rights already in the contract for your story to get translated, and they'd pay you money, and it told how much. If they wanted to issue a best of Analog anthology for the year, and they wanted to include your story in it, by signing that contract, you had already given them permission, and they gave you money, and it told you how much. And I never complained about either of these because the amount of additional money was good. If they did it, great. They honestly never did, but it was right there what they would do. The new contract does not promise that. It has all sorts of ways that it implicitly gives them the right to publish archives of the magazine without paying you any more. to license the magazine in the form that it's in to Netflix or another streaming service without paying you. Chris analyzes the contracts in some detail to show this and to show reasons why they are tromping all over your copyright. And they may say, well, that's not what we meant, or the classic, we would never do that. And you remember, some of you were here for my not on your life presentation, why I'm not signing this contract. And I talked about, if you would never do that, then put it in the contract that you're never going to do that. Because even if you are a saint, saints get run over by buses and the devil inherits the magazine. And this is one reason why I recommend, if you want to read a lot more about this, pay the $1 to become a monthly subscriber to Chris's Patreon and go through the archives. She's been writing about this since mid-July. She's had a 40-year history selling to these magazines, editing one of them. She is never going to submit to any of them again because of a question she asks. If you're in the publishing business, you should understand contracts. Remember that place she worked that had the M contract and the K contract and the D and the A contract. These things don't happen accidentally. This company did not accidentally write a bad contract. Now, they claim they're trying to fix it because they've run into issues. SFWA, the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers Association, has taken them to task and said, your contracts are horrible. And they said, we're going to clean it up. Submission Grinder has delisted analog. Why not the other ones? I don't know, but Submission Grinder has delisted analog because of these contracts. They keep saying, we're going to clean it up. We're going to clean it up. And Chris has been talking to people that she will not name because she promised them anonymity, but she's looking at the evolving contracts, and the evolution isn't getting any better, and in some ways is getting worse, to the point where Chris is going through an effort that is described in the copyright handbook of how she can register every story she has ever published in these 5 magazines. And that costs money. Now, there are ways you can do it in groups of stories. To register a group of stories, the rules, as I understand it, I'm not your lawyer, I'm not an expert, but I'll try to explain what I read, is all the stories you try to register as a group must have been published within a 1-year time frame of them, of each other. So she could, in theory, but probably it's got to be, each one's got to be a particular market. So she's got 5 magazines. She could, in theory, register 40 different 1-year groups for each of the 5 magazines. So that's 200 groups. I think the cost to register a group is like $40. So that's $8,000. But registered copyright is different from copyright. And these are all things covered in this book. Copyright, when I am saying these words right now to you, these very words, the words you're hearing me say, and I am recording this for playback later, because I am recording it for playback later, these words are copyright to me. That is the way copyright works under the Berne Convention, which is the convention that applies to most of the world for copyright. If you write down a Facebook post, that Facebook post is copyrighted. The reason Facebook has these convoluted user agreements that everybody thinks they're trying to steal your work is like, no. If you wrote it down and didn't give them permission, then they couldn't show it to me. You have to give them permission to show it to me and to your friends and to the world. And rather than have you do that on every single thing you write, you agree to user agreement terms that let them publish the thing you hand to them, and let you restrict who you will show it to, so that you can choose particular audiences not to show it to. Everything you create in a fixed form is copyrighted without registration. However, registration is kind of planting a stake in the ground that says, If you're in the business of publishing, you know this registered thing means you can't use this. And if you do, my ability to collect from you goes up. My damages I can ask from you goes up. Her registering all of these is basically her saying, no, you cannot use any of my work in an archive or license that archive to a production service for 80, let's see, it'd be 40 years, five each. So it's 200 times. I did that math before. So it's $8,000, but she's protecting her work, and she gets extremely upset when people say it's just one story. What does it matter? It's like she's heard too many cases of that one story being abused and taken advantage of. So Chris will want you to read this book. Dina will want you to read this book, or at least skim it to know the basics of the topics. And I will recommend, if you want to keep up with the business side, give Chris $1 a month. She's going to teach much better than I would on this stuff. Surprisingly, I've gone way over, but I wanted to finish with this because Dean posted a blog post just within like the last 2 weeks of things he believes about writing. And I thought it was so timely since I knew this was coming up. He explains each of these in more detail on the blog post. I just got the headline points. And again, these are what he believes. These are not rules you must follow, but they're a summary of kind of the lessons I've learned from Dean. Nobody should ever tell you what you can and can't write in your fiction. I will take that even farther, that I kind of don't like asking for advice on somebody on what to write. Even though I may ask it, finally, I'm the person sitting at that keyboard or sitting at that microphone. I am the person who is responsible for this. I can't sit here and wait for your permission on what to write. That just lacks confidence. Nobody should be telling you what to write, and you need to decide to write what matters to you. Do not believe that anyone should write sloppy. Again, he does not believe in the rewriting. Write it right the first time. Don't believe you should rewrite. Now, this may be your process, that you get it down and you clean it later. He doesn't believe in that. That's his choice. Doesn't believe anyone should ever touch one of his stories. This will get editors angry with you, but he would rather not make the sale than have somebody change his stories. He's in a little better position to do that, but his point is, you wrote it that way for a reason. If you have confidence, people shouldn't be touching it. I won't go that far. I will listen to editors. I listen to one who's on this call, as a matter of fact. But mine is ultimately the name on the story, so mine is the ultimate decision on every change. He doesn't believe in anyone reading it in progress. He doesn't like beta readers, both of which he feels like are ways to be afraid, ways to let your self-doubt in, but you're trying to let somebody else settle the self-doubt for you. His choice. You may think the beta readers are wonderful. That's your choice. And a bigger one that I really kind of am agreeing on him, there are no story police. There's nothing to be afraid of in fiction writing other than rejection. And rejection sucks, we all know that. But there's nothing to be afraid of. You aren't going to have the story police show up at your door and drag you off to prison because you wrote something they didn't like. A lesson I have heard from multiple editors is they never remember bad stories or the authors who write them. With one exception. If they've come to trust that you write good stories and you write a bad one, they're going to remember that and wonder what's wrong with you. But they don't remember the bad stories. They do remember the good. They do remember bad behavior. Sean Wallace, who is the assistant editor at Clarkesworld and is the editor at The Dark Magazine, and I think a couple of others, recently told us horror story of the person whose story he rejected and came back and wrote a page-long diatribe on how Sean was a completely incompetent editor, didn't know what he was talking about, and this guy hoped he had fun with his knitting because Sean had no future in the writing business. Well, Sean's been a publishing editor or editorial assistant for as long as I've been selling. This guy, Sean didn't share his name because he's professional, but I'll bet we never see a single bit of sold fiction out of this guy. But there's nothing to be afraid of. Rejection sucks. Give yourself 5 minutes to moan and whine and then move on. All right. Questions on Dean and Chris? Please, please, please check out their blogs. If you like their blogs, check out their books, the writing books. If you like the writing books, check out their fiction books. Here's our upcoming schedule. Remember, next week I am at the Ann Arbor Duelist Tournament, which is no longer in Ann Arbor, which is a long story there, but I am looking at the clock and saying we don't have time for that long story because you know how long my stories can go. But I won't be here. 17th, we'll be talking about distance and scope and space, long way down to the chemist. 24th, we'll be learning from improv. 31st, we'll get the Bradbury method, the one I've been hinting at for a while here. 7th will be another one on learning and learning progression. Then 4 weeks of making story models. And then we'll be talking about Kevin and Rebecca on the 12th. And the 19th, we'll be talking about free fall and spin gravity and all the ways they can kill you. Any questions? All right. As you can tell, they've had a huge influence on my thinking about writing. Far more than my writing process, other than don't rewrite, send it out and move on. They've had a lot to do with my thinking about the writing business. And so I wanted to share that with you, share some lessons, and encourage you to go learn from them. And if there are no questions, then let us stop the share and wish everyone a happy remaining part of the weekend.
Thank you, Martin. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.